How did the idea for the film come about? To what extent was it a sort of a development from your previous work, the trilogy?
Well, this may sound curious, being a member of the same family. I'm the youngest of 10. 3 died when they were small. But when my father died in 1952, I remember my mother and my eldest brother and my 2 elder sisters constantly talking about what had happened. It was, I suppose, a kind of therapy, because they were just talking about what he'd done. It was the most extraordinary story. When I was trying to do Distant Voices, Still Lives, I couldn't have coped with having 10 or 7 people in a cast. I just wasn't experienced enough, and it did feel like 2 separate families, because given the fact that there were 7 of us, I felt like an only child. I know that sounds absurd. When I was writing it, I remembered all those times, usually on a Friday night when everyone got together, and definitely on a Saturday when they'd all come back from the pub, where they would just talk, if they weren't singing. What I was also using was not just these stories which had been told to me and which I had heard, but the things which I had experienced myself, like the radio. I mean, the fact that there was only the BBC radio, and it was the Home, the Light, the Third, and the Home service was the first one that started it, and it always began with a shipping forecast, and I didn't understand what it meant, but it was a wonderful mantra, and especially the way they spoke. Fair isle, chromative 40s, winds freshening south to southeast, moderate to poor visibility with some fog banks. Isn't it fabulous? I had no idea what it meant. And as soon as you recreate something like that, as soon as you hear that, a whole generation is recreated. That Britain has gone, it's vanished. So there was all of that was part of my direct experience, and having discovered the 4 quartets, which is about the nature of memory, amongst other things.
Obviously, to some extent, this is about associations for you in terms of memories and stories and emotions. How did you actually decide what to include and what to exclude from all these stories that you've been told, and how did you sort of decide how to order them? Because some of the juxtapositions are quite strange.
Smell, for instance, is like hearing. You can conjure up a world like that. And when I was at primary school, we had a little strip of grass in the back playground which we weren't allowed to play on. And when it was cut, you could smell it throughout the entire school. And every time I smell cut grass, I'm back in my primary school, where I was very, very happy. And so I thought, that's the template. I mean, if you get something like the shipping forecast, like Gene Metcalf introducing family favourites, you already are creating that smell in a way, that emotional smell. And music has the same effect. The structure imposed itself. It's like a pebble being dropped in a pond, and all the ripples are part of the memory. They're part of the original pebble being dropped in the pond. And that's where it came from. And I just let it be associative, because all those memories were associative within me. The long shot in the house, the first shot inside the house, holds for a very long time, and they come down the stairs and you don't see them. And then it does a 180-degree turn. If it doesn't tell you anything, it tells you this is not linear.
Yes.
And you've got to, in some way, in the first 2 minutes, say what the tone is of the film and how you're going to tell it. And you have to do that within a very short time. And if you don't do that, then it does become confusing.
Yeah. It also announces that it's about memories.
Yes.
And because, you're hearing the voices, but you're not seeing things. It's like ghosts.
Yes.
One of the things that does impart a structure to it, apart from sort of the diptych thing where you have sort of life with father and life without father, one of the things is that you use certain social rituals, weddings, funerals, births and christenings, and Christmas parties as well. Why did you do that?
Because they were huge. They were huge in an ordinary working class family. And I think those things still are. People die, they get married, they have a child. those were the few times you celebrated, you know, and they really did bind you together, and everyone did that. It wasn't just our family, everybody did it. And I suppose it's because I was brought up a Catholic. The idea of ritual it's also very comforting, because you know where you are. I mean, and I'm not by any means being reactionary and saying, oh, we should go back to the way we were in the 50s. We can't do that, and that would be silly. But life was very structured in every single way. You know, you, like Sundays, for instance, you got up, and those days, if you were going to communion, you had to fast. You couldn't eat. So you had Holy Communion and Mass. You came back, you had bacon and eggs and a cup of tea, and then nothing until 12 o'clock. And then you had two-way family favourites, the Billy Cotton Band Show, Round the Horn, or Beyond Our Ken, and then nothing until 5, when it was pineapple chunks and evaporated milk. But the ritual of it, in a way, was very, very comforting, because you knew where you were, like you knew where you were socially. You know, anybody in authority automatically commanded respect. So it was very, very structured. And even the days of the week were different. Monday wasn't like Wednesday. And Thursday was washing day, so all the curtains were taken down. It was just different.
Here I go again. I hear those trumpets blow again.
Actors love to sing. If they can sing, they love to sing. Well, ordinary people love to sing too. You know. I mean, everything from communal singing to songs of praise, if you're really desperate. But people do love to sing. They just do. And the difficulty was, obviously, I mean, people who had extremely good voices got a little bit worried in still lives because of the pub having to be smoky, because it was. And I said, well, look, that's the way it was. There's no way around that.
You've had various actresses over the years play your mother in the trilogy, as well as The Long Day Closes. But what was it about Frida that made you want to cast her as your mother? Because obviously it was very important you got that right because of your great love for your mother.
Well, I'd always been a fan of hers, because I'd seen her only on television. And I was looking through Spotlight as a sort of an aid memoir, and I said, well, could you pass me the one on actresses? And it was passed over to me, and I dropped it, and it opened at Frida Dawes. Really? I'll never forget that.
Obviously, another crucial piece of casting was your father, and Peter Postlethwaite is terrifying in it. What was it about Peter?
Well, I saw a private function, and he actually is the only member of the cast who looks like any member of my family looks like my father. And so I approached him, and he came in and was clearly not impressed with either me, or anything else. And I said to Jenny Howes, who produced, I said, he'll say no. She said, no, he won't. I'll show him the trilogy. And she did, and he then said yes.
The performance on screen is very impressive, though.
Yes, oh, absolutely. I mean, and there were things in it that I still think are wonderful.
Why can't I come in, Dad?
I had written, when he says to him, frig off, with an exclamation mark for it to be shouted. And he said, I don't want to do that. I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, I want to say it quietly. I said, well, say it. And he just says, frig off. And it's chilling. I said, of course you've got to say it like that. Of course you have, because it's better.
There's no place for you here. Frig off.
One thing about this film is there's an awful lot of humour in this film. I think people sometimes think it's quite dark because of the stuff, particularly with your father. But you're a very funny person, and humour comes through very strongly in your films. Is it important to you to get humour into most of your films?
Yes, but also, I mean, those Northern women are funny. I mean, they were funny. There was always that banter between people, and I wanted to try and capture that because it's fun, you know. And I've heard that kind of banter, you know, all the time. You hear it all the time in the North, and I love that.
Oh, hey, Dave, you're not talking about football again, are you?
Behave, will ya?
Sticking up his football, man.
Aren't they all? Look at that thing I'm married to. It gets more worked up over a set of fixtures than me and me nude. Do you know what? If I was a centre forward, I'd be laughing.
I don't know what people make of Uncle Ted, but he was my father's brother, a complete nutter. Uncle Ted would argue with his wife, would run out into the street with a knife and say, 3 weeks from tonight, I'm going to stab you. I mean, why 3 weeks? Why not do it then? I mean, you cannot believe what nutters they were.
There is a great deal of emphasis in the film on doors.
Very often I was in the house on my own. I was constantly either at the door or looking in the door or being round the door or playing outside the door. It's like windows, you know, that is a direct influence, I think, of Vermeer, and light falling through windows. But it was because I spent a great deal of time in the house looking at it, being in it, loving it, even though it was a Liverpool slum, for God's sake. But I love that house. I've never lived anywhere where I've felt that kind of love for a building.
Yeah. Would you describe yourself as somebody for whom cinema has been a great, not only a great passion, but a sort of, even a salvation in some ways? Because it seems that you're making a great tribute to the power of cinema here.
Yes, it has been an enormous importance to me, a great, great passion. But it was Mark Kermode said, you obviously went to the cinema as if it were a religious experience. And I thought, God, yes, he's right, I did. I mean, it was incredibly intense. It was communal. People went and the cinemas were packed. You very often queued. You just did. You know, there were 8 cinemas within walking distance of my house. That was without going into town, and there was another 8 down there. But also, you know, seeing something like The Robe, seeing something like Love is a Many Splendid Thing in CinemaScope, and the audience gasping when the curtains went back. I mean, it was all of that.
Then we get, cut beautifully in time to the music, a very strange shift of scene. And it's completely disorientating because at first we don't know what we're looking at, and then we see in slow motion 2 people, 2 figures, appear at the side of the screen and they're moving away from us as if they're floating through the air. I want to know how you came to that association from the cinema, from a packed cinema, to this bizarre accident, and a very strange way of portraying that accident.
Well, there were 2 separate accidents, and I couldn't afford 2 accidents. That was one consideration. My eldest brother was in the army, and some boxes of ammunition fell on him, and they crushed his leg and broke it. When my sister Maisie got married, her husband, who was still a painter and decorator, fell off scaffolding. And I thought it would be much more powerful if these 2 accidents take place at the same time, because it really makes you realise that life is, you know, our hold on it is absolutely tenuous. And I wanted it to come out of the blue like that, but not to know what it is, to be explained later, you know. I don't know why I saw them falling through glass and that we were looking straight down onto... I have no idea where that comes from. It just came, and I just thought, if they fall through it, especially in slow motion, it will look terrific. But what I didn't realise, and again, this is serendipity, you know, obviously that glass is sugar glass, it's not real glass. But of course, all the splinters shimmer like this. I didn't realise, I mean, that was wonderful. I went crazy when I saw that. And then there's another ellipsis where you go from one bed to the window, you come down, it's a different bed. Yes. You know, where are you? I love the idea of dissolving from one thing to another, cutting within that sequence and cutting back or dissolving back. Where is time? In a way, it's when things like that happen, someone dies, someone has a serious accident, you feel the time is suspended.
Yes.
That in an odd way, time stops. And you can do that in cinema. You can make it feel as though it's stopped.
We talked about one particular sequence there, and I'd like to talk about another one, which starts with the camera is actually travelling fairly slowly at sort of walking speed past a lot of windows, and it ends up on a tableau of your family dressing the Christmas tree. It made me think, watching it again, this is actually about living life at a different pace, because you are recreating the sensation of somebody walking past these houses and seeing these homes, and you're wondering what's going on behind the curtains. Was that part of your intention?
No, I do think, now that you've said it, I'd never thought about the physical pace of life. You're actually quite right. It was much slower. It really, really was. And you walked everywhere. You may have got the tram or the bus, but you walked, and it was nothing for you to walk, 2 miles to work and work. I mean, people did, but the pace was slower.
But it's all about really creating a world that you remember that is different from the one that you made the film in. And actually, that brings me on to something that I haven't mentioned, which is the use of colour in this film, which is, I think, very special. It's sort of slightly washed out. Could you talk about why you wanted it to look like that?
Well, I remember the interiors of the house. I remember texture very much. There was not that much colour. There were in women's dresses, because it's a great period for women's dresses, but I remember muted textures. And I'd heard that Metrocolour had come up with this bleach bypass process where they leave the silver oxide in, and that desaturates the colour. But it's been first used by Michael Radford in 1984, but the bias was to blues and steel greys and reds. And I didn't want that. I wanted it within the tonal ranges of brown. That was everything from pink, to really dark brown and sepia, because you can't watch sepia, it's too difficult to watch. And we did some tests, and just leaving the bleach bypass process as it is makes everything cold. So we had to find a way of warming things up and making that texture that I saw. And I'll give you an example. There were, on the walls in the parlour, this wallpaper which had little rosebuds on. And would you believe the art director got it? I don't know where on earth she got it from, but she got it. But then if you wash it with a very light yellow, it pings out. You get a really sort of sparse look in Distant Voices, but it's much warmer in Still Lives, because it begins with a child. All the colour is muted, but it's warm, and it has an emotional warmth. That was exactly the way I wanted it to look.
I felt when I saw Distant Voices, Still Lives, when it came out, that I was watching a film quite unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I've only actually seen one film like it since, and that's The Long Day Closes. They are absolutely superb films, but they're sort of quite isolated. Do you feel like they're anybody else's films?
Well, when it's difficult to look at them myself, because I like bits of them. I think, that's not bad. I like that. I look at Cries and Whispers or Fanny and Alexander, and my film seem incredibly clumsy and crude by comparison. I couldn't have done Fanny and Alexander, which I adore. I absolutely adore. Things in that are breathtaking. And so I do always feel like they also ran. But that isn't false modesty. It's the truth. That's how I feel. And when I compare to my films to other people, I find them wanting.
Is there any moment in any of those films that speaks especially to you in terms of its authenticity, that you really got something quite right?
Well, I think it's towards the end of Still Lives, when Frida, as my mum is singing, My Thanks to You.
These foolish words of mine can never say.
Because she always sang that. And the colour is particularly soft and lovely. She's got this lovely soft blue, grey dress on and this lovely rose, carnation, I should say. And it's done very simply, and she just sings it straightforward. It just sounds just like my mum. There's another bit where the three of them, my two sisters and my brother, and they just stand there. And I think of the number of times I just saw them stand there. And I'm proud of that.
Thank you very much, Terence Davies.
Thank you very much.